Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss productivity tactics that work for neurodivergent individuals.
Every episode, we interview guests with lived experience of neurodiversity who also have a solid productivity and habit game, and pass the learnings on to you, our wise and benevolent audience.
We're your hosts, Jeremy and Joey.
I'm Joey, and I coach creatives to get moving on their most ambitious projects through the power of solid habits and strong focus. I'm also a perpetual student of psychology and perpetually on a quest to a one-armed chin-up.
And I'm Jeremy, a neurospicy software developer turned startup founder, building the Focus Bear app to help people with ADHD and autism thrive at work. My cool party trick is leaving parties early so I can get to sleep in time for my 2-hour-long morning routine. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by Focus Bear, a focus enhancement app for ADHDers. That's adults with both combined autism and ADHD. I'm Jeremy, I'm an ADHDer myself. I'm the founder of Focus Bear and also one of the hosts of this podcast. I built Focus Bear for myself originally because I was constantly getting distracted by my phone and my laptop. I wanted a way to tame my ADHD monkey mind so I'd stop going down rabbit holes and actually get work done, but also get off my computer and my phone in the evening so I'd be able to sleep properly. It's working perfectly for me and it's helping a lot of ADHDs as well. I'd love for you to try it. It's available for Mac, Windows, iOS and Android, and it leverages most of the productivity strategies we talk about on the podcast. You can jump onto focusbear.io or just Google Focus Bear and try it out. Let me know what you think. Welcome to episode number 99 of the Focus and Chill podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined by Annie Crowe today. Annie is an autistic and ADHD human rights lawyer, founder of the Neuro Access Network, and host of the Princess and the Pea podcast, supporting highly sensitive, twice exceptional neurodivergent adults. She is a sought-after keynote speaker on neurodiversity, burnout, and accessibility, having presented to government, international business, and even Parliament. In 2022, she founded Eating Disorders Neurodiversity Australia to promote neurodiversity affirming care. Outside of advocacy, Annie loves productivity, tech, Notion, and life with her ADHD husband, neurodivergent son, and standard neurotypical poodle, Moose.
No, he's definitely neurodivergent.
Just standard in terms of the breed, but...
Standard poodle, yeah. That was the breed size, not the brain, because he's definitely an ADHD like his mum.
Let's launch into that side of things in terms of your own experience with coming to terms with your own neurodivergence. When did you realize that you weren't neurotypical or not a standard human?
I love that. And I have a funny story about that later. But I was 28 when I was formally diagnosed autistic ADHD. But obviously I knew since I started to have self-awareness when I was young that I was different. My nickname as a kid was Princess and the Pea from my parents because I was highly sensitive to literally everything. I was emotionally sensitive, physically sensitive to touches, taste, sound, light, everything. And my emotional regulation was a hot mess, which I'm pleased to say is much better these days with adequate supports and regular therapy. That's why I called my podcast that. And it's essentially wanting to help people like myself accept who they are and even be proud of it. Pride's not always easy to get to. It took me a long time to get there. But I'm 6 years post-diagnosis or identification now. I can genuinely say I'm proud to be autistic and ADHD, and I just want that for others as well. But it was a long journey to get to that point of recognizing my neurodivergence. I probably started it in my early 20s when I started full-time work and was really struggling, which led me to go into therapy. But the first few years of therapy, it was never flagged. I just got told I had anxiety and depression. Eventually, it was actually being diagnosed with PTSD from a pretty traumatic car accident that I started seeing ADHD come up when I was researching PTSD. And so I looked into that and very quickly realized I ticked literally all the boxes because I'm combined type ADHD. And that's when I sought a proper diagnosis through a psychiatrist. And when I went in to the assessment, which was, did my very autistic thing of having my binder and all my school reports and everything flagged, which at the time I didn't realize was an autistic thing to do. At the end of the assessment, he said, "Oh, well, you're definitely ADHD. Is there anything else?" And I said, "Is that a trick question?" Like legitimately, because I'd already got, PTSD, anxiety, depression. And he said, no, you're autistic. And I'm like, what? No way. Because I thought autistic people were not good with people and couldn't be social, which is not accurate. I've always considered myself an extrovert and a good people person. And I've done lots of leadership roles. So I just didn't think that could possibly be me. And he showed me a comic which debunked a bit of that. And that just made me willing to look into it. I would have looked into it anyway, the fact that he wanted to label me with it. When I did, I was not only completely in agreement, I'm 100% autistic, but really angry that all the reading and research I'd done on ADHD had not mentioned the highly common overlap in women or in anyone, but I obviously was heavily researching ADHD in women. And that really was probably the beginning of me wanting to become an advocate publicly about it. I didn't start publicly talking for 2 years until 2 years after my diagnosis, because I wanted to deeply process it and understand it and where society's at in understanding it and all of those things. And it's also aligned with me having my son and taking maternity leave from the federal public service. And yeah, while I was on mat leave, I started to dabble and it took off. So I quit my public service job and my life has been so much better working for myself.
Being able to control the environment and the tasks you take on.
100%. So much better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting that it wasn't more well known in the past. Do you think it's better now because there are more people telling their own stories and more research as well about the overlap?
I do. But some of it's better. Some of it's still problematic, including recent very high profile politicians saying the rising rates of autism is like not actually accurate in terms of how I'm saying this. I don't know how I'm explaining this. But anyway, basically people just kind of dismissing autism diagnoses. But I think more celebrities who are recognizing their ADHD are slowly figuring out they're also autistic, which is helping people understand that overlap. I mean, it's only been 11 years since the DSM changed, so you could be diagnosed with both. So I think post-COVID and the uprise in TikTok and social media on autism and ADHD, it's becoming better known. And even the people who just speak in the ADHD spaces, like How to ADHD, Jess McCabe, or the ADHD Chatter podcast, which is a good one, they also frequently have guests or talk about autism as well, which I love because that was not around 6 years ago, pre-COVID, when I was diagnosed. And it definitely, people need to understand it. And one of the things that I talk to my community about is that autism is more heavily stigmatized than ADHD. And every time I say this, ADHDers get their knickers in a knot because they're like, no, ADHD is so stigmatized. And that is so true. I'm not trying to invalidate that. The lazy, unproductive, all of that stuff is so horrid and so real. But if you look on LinkedIn, which is obviously a more professional social media setting, people are so much more open about being ADHD in the workplace than autism, than being autistic. So the social element of autism is still mostly because I think it's not understood. People don't understand the double empathy problem and all of that. So they just think what I had the assumption of when I was diagnosed, that autistic people are like the Sheldon Coopers of the world, people who just can't have social interactions. That is something that I'm really passionate about debunking because that's just a very limited understanding of autism. And majority of my community, I run a membership called the Network, which is purely for neurodivergent adults, mostly autistic and ADHD. And I started that mostly because everything out there seems to be very focused on children, which is understandable and very important. I do help parents with kids accessing schools and stuff, but I really just wanted to create a community that was for adults who mostly tend to be late identified, just because that's kind of my story and that's what resonates with my audience, who are trying to process all of this stuff. You know, they've got a lot to unpack, a lifetime of if only I knew. Not saying knowing earlier is easier. That's its whole bunch of complications and trauma and problems with finding out early as well, but it's just a different situation. And yeah, I forgot what we were talking about. Very ADHD of me.
No, I guess one of the things I wanted to circle back to was you said that you now feel proud of your autism and ADHD. And I think that's a really interesting point, running off what you were saying about the stigma for autism. There's an event that started maybe 2 years ago, Autism Pride Day. They've got events in Melbourne and they had one in Sydney this year. And that the attendance is relatively low, I'd have to say. But I really enjoyed being there and being able to talk about the positive aspects of autism as well. I hope that narrative might start to permeate through LinkedIn and other public spheres as well.
I hope so too. I certainly am trying to do so in my advocacy efforts. One of the things that I find really interesting around talking about strengths is you see the parents who are like, oh, my autism's my kid's superpower or something. And I don't connect with that. I can see it's coming from a really good place of wanting their kids to have pride, or at least not have shame about the diagnosis or label. But I don't resonate with saying like autism or ADHD is my superpower. If you do, that's awesome. But for a lot of my audience and myself, it's quite alienating. Acceptance is hard enough. I'm still proud of it, and we'll get to that. But the strength stuff, I sort of like to talk about. So many of our traits can be really helpful and really challenging. One of my go-tos, and anyone who listens to my stuff is probably going to roll their eyes at this because I talk about it all the time, but perfectionism is my favorite thing to pick on because it tends to be the topic I talk about most. I get a lot of perfectionists in burnout and such things like that. Anyway, but one of the first big speeches I did when I started Eating Disorders Neurodiversity Australia was at the Sydney Convention Centre on autism and eating disorders. And there's this massive room full of health professionals, mental health professionals, allied health professionals, carers, people with lived experience, everything, right? And I'd sat through 2 days of listening to people go on about the dangers of perfectionism and how we need to stop people being perfectionists, right? And I'm sitting there going like, that is one of my biggest identities. I am a hardcore perfectionist, and it has brought me so much achievement and so much hardship. Equally, genuinely. And so I don't really view perfectionism as a good or bad thing. This is the attitude I take towards all human traits and characteristics. If we start coming at them from a neutral lens, without judgment and with curiosity, then we have more autonomy and power to choose what we lean into versus maybe what we get support with. But it's coming from our cognizant, self-aware choice, not someone else saying this is a good trait, this is a bad trait, this is ideal, neuronormative, how you should want to be, this is bad, you're a failure. You know, when I say I'm proud to be autistic and ADHD, it's not along the lines of it's my superpower, although I do lean into the strengths that it comes with, but I also deal with some of the challenges. It's more that I'm completely allowing myself to take up space. One of the things I really like to talk about is systemic dismissal. So obviously the people that are in my community and that I mostly talk to and resonate with, especially in a lot of the talks I do in the workplace, tend to be, you know, high masking autistic, ADHDers, late identified. And so much of it comes down to people talking about it's on the individual, like, oh, you were masking, that's why you weren't identified, you didn't get help because you were hiding those traits. I just don't actually think that's true. So if you think about systemic dismissal, it's the structural and cultural refusal to recognize, accommodate, and validate neurodivergent experiences. So really it's saying, well, I was there, but because I wasn't making it obvious enough for you, you didn't recognize it. This is a mindset shift for me when I was diagnosed and really started to embrace my neurodivergence, which took a while. It didn't happen overnight. It's this shift of I'm not the problem. The world and system is not made up to support my needs. And that's why I really focus on accessibility. It's why my business is called Neuro Access, because as much as we're striving for inclusion, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I think accessibility is at its core, the foundation of those things. And a lot of what we're seeing in the workplace is people wanting to talk about neurodiversity at work and do the high-level inclusion stuff, like what's the right language, what does it mean? But then that's it. Not many workplaces are ready to go the deeper level of thinking about accessibility for neurodivergent employees and think about what reasonable accommodations, I say that because that's the legal terminology, reasonable accommodations. I don't love that term. Reasonable adjustments or accommodations can we make to make their lives easier and to make them successful at work, both for their own sanity and ours. Like, it helps everyone. At the moment, we've still got a very reactive workforce where, usually a lot of neurodivergent people will somehow fall into performance management. If you hit that, you're already too late with putting access in. Like, I'm not saying it's too late to come back from, but workplaces, leaders need to take responsibility that if they provide the right access, these workers won't get to a point where they need performance managers. Heck, they'll be your best performers. There's so many strengths in what we bring to the workforce, but we need the little tweaks and helps to actually be able to survive in it. Otherwise, we burn out. We can't get a job. We can't keep a job. We get chronic illnesses, so many things. Anyway, I think I just took us on a side quest, but such is our brains.
It's where I wanted to go next in terms of the type of work that you're doing. I'd love to go down that side quest a bit more and hear about the type of organizations that you work with and the adjustments or accommodations that you think organizations should be adopting.
Yeah, so I am a very ADHDer when it comes to my work. I have my hat in a lot of baskets. That's probably not even the saying. But anyway, I do a lot of different things and I like that. It keeps me engaged and excited and interested. I'll have phases where I'm doing more of one thing and more of another, or phases where I've had to pull back because I do have multiple chronic illnesses as well. I do a bit of everything from, obviously my biggest priority is my community, the network, the Neuro Access Network, mostly because it's where I feel like I can really impact people's lives on a personal level, but also it fills my cup. I get a lot of people coming to me for help, and a lot of the time I feel like I'm repeating the same stuff, trying to teach individuals. So it was just easier for me to create this collective space where not only they could learn from me, but also their neurokin, essentially. That's probably my main day-to-day. I'm always doing stuff with them, and I do like 4 workshops a year with them. We do body doubling. We do social neurokin connect events monthly. We do office hours where they can come and ask me questions, not only about helping them advocate in their own lives for themselves or their kids, but also a lot of my network members are actually community advocates themselves. So whether they've got podcasts, social media pages, or they're doing consulting or speaking gigs, I also get a lot of people coming to me like wanting help to become advocates themselves, which I love. And I feel like the more of us, the better, right? It's a big problem we need to tackle. So the other stuff I tend to do is I speak at conferences, generally on anything to do with mental health, disability, leadership, workplace. I speak to a lot of workplaces. I just launched the AstraZeneca Australia, New Zealand Neurodiversity Employee Resource Group. That was a mouthful, ERG. Last year, I was their guest speaker for their launch. I've spoken to government departments like Home Affairs, the ACCC, Competition Consumer Commission, and lots of businesses. The businesses that tend to come to me are like engineering businesses, law business, like lawyers, that sort of thing. And they get me to do everything from introduction to neurodiversity to accessibility in the workplace talks. It's a real mix and it keeps me on my toes. I love it. I also do advisory and consulting work as well. I'm currently off boards because I'm taking a break, but last year I was on Enabled VIP board. I was the board chair, and that's all about helping people with disability access employment, usually self-employment or side hustles, hobbies, empowerment. I've been on the Autism Camps Australia board back in the day. I obviously started EDNA, Eating Disorders Neurodiversity Australia. So I love that sort of stuff. It's a love-hate relationship. I don't love being on boards, but I love helping, working towards a common goal and affecting change. The consulting stuff I do, I've worked with ABTA. I feel like I'm reading you my resume here. I have so many different little areas. So like the Australasian Birth Trauma Association, that's one of my little areas that I like to advocate in. I consult with them and make resources for them. The National Eating Disorder Collaboration, I've done quite a bit of help with. I've helped them create resources on anything to do with eating disorders. And yeah, whoever approaches me, my thought process around saying yes to things is usually like, is this an area I'm interested in? Do I have the energy? And will it help me? One thing I definitely noticed, like doing this for the last 4 years, has been some things really lift me up and give me energy and others drain it rapidly. It doesn't necessarily correlate to how interested I am in them, which, you know, I have a very interest-based nervous system, but it's also like how much emotional processing do I have to do? So even though I love advocating in the eating disorder space, it's probably the most draining for me emotionally. Similarly, actually, in the workplace, the early days of my advocacy, I kind of avoided anything to do with neurodiversity at work, even though that's what people wanted me to talk about, because I've had a lot of workplace trauma myself. And to be honest, feel like I failed traditional work, which isn't quite accurate, but that's just how I feel. Some would say I was really successful, but whatever. It depends how you measure success. And, you know, it's going back to those places and being like, well, this is what harmed me and what harms my community and what you should be doing to improve is really confronting. Most of my work is like that, though. Anyway, I have a good therapist. Highly recommend therapy.
Do you also have the flip side of that story of here are some organizations that have been doing it right, or is it still too early for that?
I think it's still too early in terms of there are definitely organizations that are doing better and are probably leading examples, but I don't think anyone's there yet. They're usually better in different areas. Some are better because they have an actual neurodiversity employee group rather than just a disability one or just an LGBTQ employee resource group. And others are better because they really prioritize reasonable adjustments. I tend to find that the smaller businesses are a little bit more ahead of the game in terms of people management, possibly because they're closer and it's less, you know, chunky. The bigger businesses tend to have more resources and put things in place like not only employee resource groups, but like a employee group, WhatsApp group, things like that. But I actually tend to get a lot of them coming to me because they don't want to be in the work space for that. Because it's obviously, if you're connecting with neurokin and talking about your struggles and access barriers and all of that, it can be personal and it can be hard. Even if it's supposed to be a safe place, you just don't know who's listening and how that can impact your career. So a lot of people who join my network are professionals, whether they work for themselves or in traditional employment, who just want to have that same support, but not within their workplace, so that they feel a little bit more safe in knowing that, you know, we have Fight Club rules. What's said in the network stays in the network. There's not a lot of places in society where you can go and be surrounded by neurodivergent people just like you, or it's different but in a similar way. And you can properly unmask and you don't have to have, you know, you're not fighting the double empathy problem constantly. And it's just so healing. So I love being there myself.
Yeah. I've experienced that myself in my day job where we're in the early days of setting up an ERG and there was a public Slack channel which became quite dead because no one was willing to be vulnerable in that, because there were still comments being made in some of the training sessions around, oh, I like helping these autistic kids. It makes me feel like I'm a charitable person or something like that.
And like inspiration porn and stuff. Yeah, because I mean, and that's the problem with Facebook groups. They're probably still a thing. I avoid them these days. But back when I was diagnosed, that was where you'd get your main resources from on a social connection level, not like legitimate research and everything, but lived experience. Everyone in those groups are on very different journeys. And some of them are, you know, neurodivergent and don't know it. Some of them have just found out and are very deep in the pathology paradigm of learning about it through the lens of medicine. And some of them are all the way over here with hopefully us in the neurodiversity paradigm and thinking more about how we deserve to exist in this world. The world needs to make some adjustments so that we can, because we do add value. We do hold worth. That can be really hard. Depending on where you are in your journey, you're having to deal with people who are not as far as you and are pulling you back down into a darker place that you've been in, or just frustrating you, or you've got people further down the track who, and this is a little bit like common for our community, but can get really frustrated with the people who aren't there yet. I've been one of them. If you get someone who's just newly learning and has no clue about the language, to me, the reason I focus on language is because if you don't have the language down, what's your deeper understanding? For me, it's a trigger of like, if they're not using terminology correctly, maybe they haven't done a lot of the deep work to really unpack neuronormativity and understand neurodiversity as a concept and all of those things, which it's not a judgment that they're not there yet or good enough or anything like that. It's more of a, where are they on their journey and where do I have to meet them at? How exhausting is that for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Ideally, some of that you do on a one-to-many basis rather than having to repeat the same thing to multiple people, as you said before.
100%.
Well, that gave us a good perspective of the different types of work that you do. It sounds fun and impactful.
It is. It's fun and hopefully impactful.
Now, at the start of the episode, which may make it into the recording or not, we were talking about your dog. Do you want to talk about
Moose.
your dog and the other things that you enjoy doing in your off time?
Oh, yeah, of course. Moose, do you want to come say hello for the people who can see? You can sort of see him. He's just had a haircut, so he's shaved I call him a naked mole rat. He's my beautiful boy. So he's 7. I did try to train him to be my emotional support dog, but because he has quite a bit of anxiety, he wouldn't pass the public access test. So he's just my sidekick. He's pretty much been my everything. I went through mat leave and starting my business and working from home for the last 4 years with him by my side. And I've only recently this year gone into a co-working space, which I'm loving. We can talk about that later if you want. But he actually comes into the co-working space with me because I feel so bad leaving him at home because he's had me 24/7. We are attached at the hip. Like, we recently went on a road trip to Adelaide to see my in-laws for Christmas and took my 4-year-old and dog. Anytime I would walk away from the car, like to go get petrol, he would whine and cry and get so upset. And anytime my husband walked away, he'd be like, yeah, so. Oh, poor man. I call him my shadow because he's everywhere I am. You can't see him, he's out of camera, but he's just staring at me next to me. He's begging for a treat. Anyway, but yeah, hobbies is interesting because my hobbies tend to align with what I do for work. It's always kind of been that way, which makes it hard to do the whole work-life balance thing. But it's something that having a co-working space has really helped me with, because I'm currently filming this from my home office, which is where I do most of my presentations and interviews from.
Yeah.
And it's got all my fancy setup with my audio stuff and lights and mic. But my workspace, I have a permanent desk in a co-working space. That's got like deep workspace. So that's where I go to do editing, report writing, speech writing, consults, everything like that. I'll do in that workspace, because whenever I'm in this room, if I'm not on a live call, I just want to play with my tech, because tech is one of my biggest hobbies. And it helps because it's obviously helped my business, being very much a virtual presenter and virtual consultant. Having good tech is really helpful. So it's helped my business, but it's also my favorite pastime. Like, you'll find me watching YouTube videos on Notion or Ecamm Live, my live production software, or Stream Deck, which I'm obsessed with. That was actually quite hard for a while because I'd find my son would go to bed in the evening and I'd just want to learn more about tech or set up my stuff. I didn't have off time, which I think is a very common thing for entrepreneurs and self-employed people to experience. But I've found a lot more work-life balance having that separation. And I'm lucky enough to have obviously a home office and a in-person office. Was that the question?
It's the next question.
The next question?
Answered both of them at the same time.
Awesome.
Can I ask about the Stream Deck? How many do you have?
You can. I have 3. How many do you have?
Well, I just did a cheap rip-off version of it where it's a numpad, and then
I've also got a numpad. It's technically a calculator numpad, but it's got macros and you can turn it into whatever you want. So
yeah, same here.
Yeah.
The number 1 mutes me on Zoom, which is helpful.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. So I have the Stream Deck XL, which is the big one. I have the Stream Deck Plus, which is the one with the 4 knobs on it. And I have the Stream Deck Pedal, which is my newest Stream Deck, which really helps when I'm doing presentations and slides and stuff, because I can just tap my foot and it goes to the next slide and I feel magical.
So you can have both of your hands up and
yeah. I talk a lot with my hands, so that's really helpful. When I didn't have the pedal, even though I've got muscle memory for a lot of my Stream Deck setup, I still have to look over because I'm nervous I'm going to hit the wrong thing. I have proprioception challenges, so sometimes that makes it hard. So I've really liked that addition. Now I've got all those 3 Stream Decks in my presenting office at home. I get sad sometimes that I don't have them at the other office, which is I cannot justify buying more Stream Decks to have them at both places.
Yep.
So I make up for that by I've got my calculator numpad, which I've turned into a Stream Deck type thing at the office. I use DaVinci Resolve for video editing. So I've also got this, I don't even know what it's called, but it's essentially like a thing it's like a numpad sort of with a wheel thing that you can scroll through. That makes my editing so much faster and easier. I'm always finding the latest tech. I've got Elgato lighting. It's all hooked up to my Stream Deck. And yeah, Rodecaster Pro 2 audio thing, which honestly, I don't even know how to use properly. Some tech I get really into wanting to know everything about it, like Stream Deck, and others I get because it's like upping my presentation game, but also I don't really care how it works. So I used to joke when I started my business that it was essentially funding my addiction to technology. Or have you ever heard of gear acquisition syndrome?
I've heard about it in the cycling context of people buying very expensive road bikes.
Yeah, it's a thing in tech as well. That's a very real thing. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about productivity and enjoyment. I like the concept of removing friction, which is a much more proactive way of talking about productivity than even talking about accessibility. It feels like it's coming from a place of we're struggling and failing. We need to get to a place where we can work. Whereas the productivity space is like, how do we just get better and be awesome? I feel like it's like a continuum, right? So for me, accessibility isn't just about not struggling with everything. It's also about thriving. How do we get to the point where you actually feel like you're thriving? Because I have quite low frustration tolerance. It's very common with twice exceptional people. If you don't know what twice exceptionality is, look it up. It'll blow your mind. That makes doing things that are hard for me really horrible. Everyone doesn't like doing things that are hard for them, but I really struggle to emotionally regulate. I also have alexithymia, which means processing and understanding my emotions is a hot mess. So essentially, if I can make my life easier in those respects, it helps tenfold. That's what I use to justify my addiction to tech.
Yeah, it makes sense. I get so frustrated with outdated systems. I've got a expense claim that I need to submit, and the system is just so frustrating that I don't want to go in there, even though I'll get like $2,000 worth of expense claims back to me.
I know, right? And this is what I think a lot of people don't understand in terms of thinking that you're just lazy or something. Like I did my law thesis pulling all-nighters for 2 weeks straight. It was so easy. It was like a walk in the park because it was on a topic I was super passionate about, flexible work practices in law firms. That was a decade and a half ago. I was still in this space of, without even knowing it, from a feminist lens. When I was a government employee, having to put in timesheets or leave applications or mandatory training, all these things that were really clunky and hard to navigate drove me off the wall. Even right now, I've tried to apply to TAFE twice in the last 6 months, so each semester, to do a Cert 4 in training and assessing, because some people come to me wanting me to speak at their workplace, but their workplace will only get speakers who have a Cert 4. So if that wasn't a thing, I wouldn't ever get it because I'm an autodidact and I like learning things myself. I've had enough of traditional education with a 5-year double degree and a grad dip in law. But that's why I'm pursuing this. Both times I've somehow missed the deadline or couldn't get my act together getting my transcript. It's so hard. I can't even explain how, like you clearly get it. Really nodding.
Same problem. I'm 80% through a Cert 4 in TAE, and the last hurdle I have put off for 5 years. And now it's out of date, so I'll have to start from the beginning.
Yeah. But it's so hard to explain to people, how can you easily do something so hard as like a law thesis, honors paper, but you can't do basic stuff like life admin, meeting pretty obvious, clearly stated deadlines. That disconnect is just so extreme. And before I knew I was neurodivergent, I used to really beat myself up about that. I also used to think I was not smart because even though I was relatively straight A/B student through school with no effort, not because I didn't want to make effort, because I couldn't. I literally couldn't do my homework. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus. I used to madly quickly do it right at the start of the lesson. I used to think I can't possibly be smart. All through high school, I got this award called the Pro Diligencia Award, which we called the Try Hard Award. They'd give it to students, not who tried hard, to students who were just missing out on the cum laude academic award. Okay. They're like, if you just try a bit harder, you'll get an academic award. And I'm like, come on, this is such a joke. My identity as someone who was intelligent was very shaky because I just didn't believe any of my achievements, including getting law honours and everything. I was the youngest person to do human rights law at Oxford. I flew over on my 20th birthday to go on exchange in that program, not ever. Even though I had all of these wins, I'm like, oh, I'm not smart. You know, really understanding that disconnect and how I find some basic things difficult but complex things easy is just very much a part of my neurodivergence and twice exceptionality. And that's really helped me in embracing all aspects of myself. When I do beat myself up or get upset at the little things, I remind myself that they don't negate the wins. And also the wins don't negate my need for support for the little things. That's a big issue in my community. People thinking you're quote unquote high functioning enough to not need support because you can do ABC, because you have a job or you're successful, you have a partner or whatever. Therefore, your struggles don't really count. And that's when validating and accurate. But it's something that I have to actively work on myself and help my clients also get through, because we do deserve support and our struggles are very valid and real.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So circling back to productivity, can you give the audience maybe 3 things that you find helpful from a productivity perspective as quick fire tactics that they could implement or try out?
I am not a quick fire person, as in I will drone on. So feel free to hone me in. But I'm in the middle of developing a thing called the Pulse framework. That name might change. I haven't gone public with it yet, but I cannot stand pacing. As someone with chronic illnesses, neurodivergence and disability, we get told to pace all the time. But pacing has never been accessible to me. And it's always just destroyed me inside about how I can't do pacing, even though I really want to. And it sounds great for people who can achieve it. So my Pulse framework is essentially it's similar to pacing in the sense that you have ups and downs, but rather than trying to keep it on this level, sort of just a little up, just a little down, it's more about embracing the waves, allowing for the spikes of hyperfocus and preparing for recovery periods. It has changed my life and productivity and health in so many ways, because I naturally have a brain that likes to deeply focus on things when it does, and then needs deep recovery. An example of this in the workplace is I've always been quicker and more thorough to do a lot of work than other people. That can be seen as a great thing, right? Because you want employees who are high performing. But what it also caused was me to quickly burn out. They don't accommodate the fact that if you're slightly, and this is like, obviously people talk about this all the time with ADHDers, you can do things faster, but you need more recovery time, rather than someone who might be neurotypical and does it on an even keel, recovers on an even keel and can keep going. So in my own life and business and everything I do, I now just allow for the big spikes, but I also check in with myself. And that's where the pulse comes in. It's like, check your pulse, check where you're at. Do you want to keep going with this spike? If you do, that's fine, but you need to plan recovery period. Or do you want to pull back because maybe you've got another thing coming up that you want to do? And that's sort of where it becomes a little bit more about pacing. Anyway, I'm not doing it justice. I'll be talking about this more online shortly if anyone wants to learn more. I love talking about this stuff in general. But yeah, I really just like working with my own energy flow and my own like brain, because what I found is when I do that, I achieve so much more. I burn out so much less and life is much better. So I'm sorry that wasn't the 3 like bang, bang, bang.
It's an impactful one. And you've already spoken about, I guess, having the various different tactile keyboards and the stream decks in order to help with for example, video editing, that can be a productivity
Yes.
tactic as well.
Hugely, hugely.
Well, on that note, when you were talking about the pulse framework, there's the spikes and then there's the recovery periods. I think we need a recovery period
We
now.
do. Let's have a break.
Hi there, Focus and Chillers. Are you ready to supercharge your knowledge in the realms of creativity, tech, and psychology? Come check out my fortnightly newsletter. In each edition, you'll get quick wins and actionable takeaways that you can put into practice right away. If this sounds like you, I'd love to have you as a reader. Subscribe for your fortnightly dose of insights. The link is in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show.
We're back from our break. I've learned what pacing is, that it isn't pacing up and down necessarily, but rather it's about potentially balancing work and rest. So on the topic of rest, what is your sleep like, and do you have any tactics around switching off at night?
Yeah, so sleep is a constant struggle in my life. I have always been a night owl and I have always detested getting up in the morning. When I was at boarding school, the lady who came around and woke us had to come back to my room like 10 times. I would only get up at the very last minute, chuck my clothes on, go downstairs, and my fellow boarders would do my hair before we walked into the dining hall because I'd be half asleep. But yeah, my sleeping pattern is so out of it. Every time I pull it back and go to sleep earlier, it takes a second to go back into staying up late. Whereas to get me to the point where I'm going to bed at a reasonable time feels like a mammoth effort every time. I've tried many things to help this because obviously, you know, there are benefits to being awake when the sun is out, and having a child 4 years ago really cemented the need for more of a regular day and routine. But when I hurt my hip about 2 years ago, I ended up needing surgery and I was basically spent almost a year in bed, which is fine because most of my work I can do from a laptop. So yeah, that kind of still worked. But when I did that, I set my bed up to have like this arm hanging over where I could put my iPad and either use it for working or watching YouTube videos, whatever. And I'd have a bed desk for my laptop and everything. That completely destroyed my sleep because zero sleep hygiene. Okay. And so since being better and able to be upright more, I have taken that all out of my bedroom and have this rule for myself, which I don't always follow, but it's like a gentle prompt that when I go to bed, I've got my Kindle and I can only read fiction, because if I read nonfiction, my brain spins with ideas and stuff that I want to do and does not slow down. And that's been probably one of the biggest game changers for me, because I'll generally, as long as the fiction book isn't too engaging, which sometimes it is, and that's a whole nother problem, I'll generally fall asleep within a few pages. I always try to be in bed before midnight. Earlier the better, but that just tends to be my rhythm. In the morning, literally every day of my life, I just want to sleep in every day. I have to constantly fight that. I don't have a morning routine like your incredible morning routine. My morning routine is don't forget your meds and maybe eat something. My energy levels fluctuate. My pain levels fluctuate. So much of my day-to-day experience is different. So I tend to wake up and just see how I'm going. Some mornings, if I'm having a day where I feel like I need that recovery, I'll stay home. I might not go straight into doing some work, maybe do some stretches, watch my favorite show, or make something yummy in the kitchen, or maybe do some housework, but something that's just slower and less brain engagement, less physical engagement. If I feel better, I'll go into the office later that day. But then there are days when I'm like, nope, today's a home day. And then there are days where I'm at the office the whole day and don't even want to leave at the end of the day because I'm on a roll. But back to sleep. Yeah, that's definitely the biggest difference for me. And I used to roll my eyes at sleep hygiene and I still do a bit, but definitely trying to force myself to be in bed by midnight and only read my Kindle and put all my other tech away is the main thing that's helped. But the struggle is constantly there. And for anyone else who struggles with sleep, I feel you.
Yeah, it's tended to be the majority of guests on the show.
Understandably.
Well, it's been really great having you on. I've got a few links here for how people could contact you. Do you want to read them out for people in terms of your website,
sure.
LinkedIn, and things like that?
Yeah,
They'll be
so
in the
my
show
website,
notes.
yeah, no worries. My website is www.neuroaccess.com.au, and LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, just look up Annie Crowe, Crowe with an E, like the bird. and you'll find me, or Neuro Access is also on Instagram and LinkedIn. But yeah, I'm mostly on LinkedIn and Instagram. My Facebook is mostly just reposting my Instagram. And I have a Twitter, but I'm rarely on it. Just trying not to spread myself too thinly. But yeah, at the moment, the network's open. If you're listening to this in Feb, will they listen to this soon or?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and it's still February, there's a discount to join the network with the code POWER2025. That discount comes up every now and then. So just watch me on socials or join my mailing list and you'll find it. But yeah, I've got a big masterclass coming up in a month for my safe self-advocacy method, which I haven't even talked about today, but is one of the things that I'm asked to speak on at a lot of conferences, finishing the book on it right now. But it's all about teaching mostly neurodivergent, chronically ill, disabled people to advocate for themselves in a way that is safe. The acronym SAFE, double meaning. It stands for things, but it also is because safety is a priority. Go on my website. There's a whole 1-hour workshop breaking that down. I think it's like neuroaccess.com.au/safe masterclass. You'll find it. Hit me up.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. This has been fun. I love your podcast. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.